let me say at the outset that this is about the most uncertain election that I can recall. And in the next 8 minutes, I do not expect to remove the uncertainty. I hope to raise it to a higher level of sophistication. At the moment, my best guess, and in 5 hours it may be different, in 5 days it might be different. After the election, I'll remind you whichever of my predictions comes closest. But at the moment, I think we're heading for a really quite interesting and fraught outcome in which the Conservatives may well have more seats than Labour, but not enough to carry on in government. So my central expectation at the moment is that Ed Miliband will become Prime Minister, but leading a smaller contingent of Labour MPs than Conservative MPs. But it'll be quite close. The Conservatives somewhere around 280, Labour around 270. And given our election system, the dial doesn't have to move very much in the last few days for the Tory figure to go up 10 or 20 or down 10 or 20, and the same for Labour, in which case it's very different. But let me briefly explain why, because in terms of what you will be facing on the morning of May the 8th, potentially, how it is that the smaller party might end up providing the Prime Minister. It's in the end very simple. David Cameron is the current Prime Minister. He will be the Prime Minister on the morning after the election. He has every right to stay in that position until he is either voted down by the House of Commons or it is clear to him that he is going to be voted down by the House of Commons and resigns. I reckon he needs close to 300 seats to be certain of commanding enough votes to stay in government. 290, it then depends on negotiations with the Liberal Democrats and the views of Tory backbenchers and Lib Dem activists. You know, it may or may not happen. If they're at 280, there's no way they can put together enough votes to stay in office. And given that I expect around 100 MPs to be not Labour or Conservative, if you add together the Scottish Nationalists, the Liberal Democrats, UKIP, the Ulster MPs, and so on. So if the Tories are on 280, Labour will be arithmetically around 270. And if that's where we end up, Cameron cannot stay on, in my view. If he then resigns, Miliband is invited to form a government. He will then put down his Queen's Speech. Now, technically, he could be voted down as well, because he's a smaller party. But think about the practical politics of this. The Conservatives have conceded they can no longer govern Britain. Are they going to provoke the public contempt that would follow from, as it were, accepting their defeat and not accepting their defeat? We had a very similar situation in 1974, and the Conservatives, having conceded they couldn't carry on, they abstained on the Queen's Speech vote. So Ed Miliband will have no difficulty getting through a Queen's Speech vote. He does not have to do any deals. The problem comes down the road, when he wants to get a budget passed, when he wants to propose new laws. And then, vote by vote, he will have to assemble majorities in the House of Commons, and we may well end up with a second election in 6 months or a year's time. That's the immediate prospect. If I'm wrong, and it moves, as it might do in the last week, back to the Conservatives and they stay in office, there will be a referendum on the European Union. All our polling evidence is that in those circumstances, the British will vote to stay in quite comfortably, because most Conservative voters who now say they'd vote to come out, if they get the leads from the leader of their own party, that we should stay in, and David Cameron will recommend a vote to stay in, most Tories will follow that lead and the referendum will be passed. So let me offer you these two contrasting propositions. The first is, we may well be in for a period of weeks, possibly months, of political instability and uncertainty. But oddly enough, if one says what will Britain look like in 2020, it seems to me reasonably clear whatever happens politically over the next few months, we will still be in the European Union. We will have tightened up the rules on immigrants claiming welfare, and this will have virtually no effect because very few immigrants come here for welfare. George Osborne's deficit targets will be missed, either because he's Chancellor and he misses them or because he's not Chancellor and they don't pursue them. There will be, if you have an expensive property in London, you will be paying more tax on it, either because Labour implements it or the Tories in the end find that it's a highly sensible thing for them to do if they're to ever get rid of their image as a party of the rich, and so on. My advice to you is that if you are a banker or a hedge fund, there will be plenty of opportunities in the next weeks and months to make a lot of money and lose a lot of money. If you are in a company that makes 5, 10, 20-year investment decisions, then relax. Oddly enough, this election, in that sense, is not going to matter very much. The medium to long-term outlook is, I think, whatever it is, whether you're a long-term optimist or pessimist about Britain. But there is one, as it were, black swan in all this. If we do have a referendum on the European Union, one cannot be absolutely certain that there won't, during the referendum campaign, be some event, some crisis in the Eurozone, some scandal, something, as it were, left field, which changes the result. So there is, let's just say, a 5% chance that we'll vote to withdraw from the EU. But if that's the case, you can be absolutely certain that Scotland will have voted to stay in the EU. So if, and I say it's only a 5% possibility, but it's not a 1% or 0.1% possibility, we could end up with a double crisis of profound significance to many of you and your companies. A crisis in terms of what then happens between London and Brussels, unravelling Britain's relationship with the EU. And secondly, a constitutional crisis in Scotland, because you can be sure that in those circumstances, the SNP will demand a new referendum saying we want to get out of the UK because we want to stay in with the EU. So there's a 95% chance, in my view, perhaps a 97% chance because there may well not be a referendum because the Conservatives may not be in office. Let's say there's a 97% chance you can be reasonably confident about what Britain will look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time, though there will be turbulence on the way. But there is this small chance that in 2 years' time we will all be facing the most enormous problems. And on that cheerful note, I'll hand back to Michael.